Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling some pretty fascinating, maybe even controversial material. Specifically, a research document from 2003 by Alexander Forlov called Free Energy.
That's right. And our mission is basically to unpack the most intriguing ideas in this source. Think of it as your shortcut to understanding a viewpoint on energy that really, pushes the boundaries of conventional thinking.
Exactly. It's definitely out there in some ways. So we'll be looking at claims about totally new energy sources, digging into some historical attempts to build fuel-less power devices.
And exploring the potential implications the document discusses, it's quite a ride, covering a lot of ground.
Yeah, get ready for some surprising concepts. We'll guide you through the key takeaways from Frolov's paper. Okay, so let's start with the absolute core idea presented in this source. It says that the physical vacuum, empty space, isn't actually empty.
Right, that's the jumping off point. The source draws on work concerning zero-point energy by people like Sakharov and Hal Puthoff. The main idea is that what we think of as empty space actually has this complex internal structure, and crucially, it has energy density.
So there's something there, not just nothingness, something with potential energy.
Exactly. And the argument is, if you could figure out how to interact with that structure, maybe change it locally, well, you could potentially use it as a new energy source. The document talks about reality involving this sort of coexistence, maybe a balance, between gravitational and electromagnetic energy. So if you increase one locally, the other decreases, keeping the total change at zero.
Ah, okay, like a kind of hidden balance within space itself.
Yeah.
And tapping that could give you energy without burning fuel or using up mass.
That's the central claim, yeah. It connects this to modifying space's internal structure to get useful energy. Now, the document takes pains to define its terms because it's using them in a specific way. It talks about potential.
Right, potential. What does it mean by that exactly? It mentions scalar parameters, gradients. Can you simplify that a bit?
Sure. Think of potential,
Yeah.
possibility, the stored capacity for something to happen, for work to be done, like the potential energy of a ball held up high.
Okay.
And the gradient is just how quickly that potential changes over distance, how steep the hill is, basically. The source says a potential field like an electrical field or a gravitational field has this real possibility to produce work if you can just manage the energy transformations correctly.
So the change in the field, the gradient, that's where the action is.
That seems to be the key point for extracting work, yes. And here's the really provocative part, according to the source. You don't need a continuous power source to maintain that potential field once it's established. The field itself is, quote, free.
Free. Okay, that word always sets off alarm bells, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially when you think about the law of energy conservation.
Yeah.
How does the document handle that?
It tackles it head on. It acknowledges that, this idea immediately makes you think about conservation laws. The proposal is that we need to maybe upgrade our understanding of that law for a four-dimensional system.
4 dimensions, you mean including time?
Exactly, including the structure of space-time itself, not just the 3 spatial dimensions we're used to.
So it's not saying the law is wrong, but maybe incomplete, or we're applying it too narrowly.
That's the angle. The idea presented is that the energy density we deal with in our everyday technology, burning gas or whatever, is actually tiny compared to the natural energy density of space itself. Sometimes the source uses the old term ether density, resulting from huge astrophysical processes. So if you could tap into that larger scale, that real rhythm of space-time, maybe that's the basis for these unconventional devices.
Okay, but standard physics says if you move something in a potential field and end up back where you started, the net work done is 0. Positive work cancels negative work. How does this get around that?
Right. The source argues that it is possible to kind of cheat the cycle. It claims that the part of the cycle where negative work is done, where you'd normally have to push against the field, can be excluded or bypassed.
Oh.
It suggests various methods. Things like spatial superposition, using carefully timed pulsing modes, changing the polarity of the interaction, or even physically screening parts of the system from the field during that negative phase.
Like designing a clever path so you only experience the downhill part of the potential and skip the uphill slog.
That's a good way to think about the technical goal, yeah. Now, it gets even more abstract. The source suggests that getting this net positive power, what it calls asymmetrical potential interaction, involves balancing an entropy process in forward time.
Like heat dissipating in a resistor, something we can see.
Right. Balancing that with an equal anti-entropy process happening supposedly in reverse time.
Reverse time. Wow. Okay. How's that explained? That sounds pretty far out there.
It's definitely one of the document's most challenging concepts. The idea seems to be that this apparent imbalance in our observable forward time reality is actually balanced by processes occurring in the opposite temporal direction, let's say. And this whole interaction results in a change in space-time curvature and even the local rate of time.
So energy isn't just vanishing or appearing from nowhere. It's being balanced by something happening elsewhere or elsewhen, possibly involving time itself flowing differently.
That's the conceptual leap, yes. It connects this to an idea called dynamical zero. The argument is, okay, you can't get something from absolutely nothing, but maybe you can create two opposite, perfectly balanced processes simultaneously. And each of those processes could, in theory, produce real work in its own context or direction.
The source mentions this connects to ancient Indian math, where zero wasn't just nothingness.
Yeah, it draws that parallel zero as a balance point of hidden potentials. And it cites a statement from 1964 by academician Gustav Nahn, suggesting you could extract any amount of energy from the vacuum, provided the same amount was simultaneously extracted for a hypothetical anti-world, keeping the overall balance at zero.
So the bottom line is, this perspective claims using potential energy this way doesn't actually violate conservation. It just forces us to generalize the law.
Exactly. In this generalized view, the total energy of the whole four-dimensional system energy in forward time plus energy in reverse time remains constant and equal to zero. The trick, then, is finding a way to technically isolate or tap into just one side of that grand balance.
Okay, so if that's the theory, tapping potential fields, space-time dynamics, maybe even time reversal, how does the document say you could actually build something based on this? Because theory is one thing, right?
Absolutely. The practical application is key. And the source does dive into potential technical approaches. As we kind of touched on, the main ideas revolve around creating a field gradient in a clever way. Either spatially, like using some kind of shield or screen on part of the trajectory, or temporally, using those pulsing modes we mentioned.
Turning the field on and off really fast at the right moments.
Yeah, specific timing, maybe specific pulse shapes are important. For gravity, which is notoriously hard to screen, the document suggests maybe changing the properties of the body moving in the field could be a way.
Interesting.
And then it launches into this huge section, really fascinating, giving tons of examples of historical inventors and projects that, according to the source, demonstrate these principles in action.
Ah, right, the perpetual motion stuff. But the document frames it differently, doesn't it?
It does. It's careful to say these aren't perpetual mobiles of the first kind, machines creating energy from absolutely nothing, which it agrees is impossible. Instead, it suggests these are systems where the energy source might just not be obvious in our usual 3D view.
So maybe tapping the vacuum or environmental heat in unusual ways or involving time?
Exactly. It talks about second-kind machines being like advanced heat pumps using negative entropy or syntropy, and third-kind machines involving perpetual motion without friction, or even systems with negative friction, like negative electrical resistance, that actually generate output power. It even gives permanent magnets and atoms as micro-level examples of this third kind.
Okay, let's get into some of those names. Nikola Tesla always comes up in these discussions. What does the source say about him?
Oh yeah, Tesla features heavily. The document mentions his flat spiral coils, claiming they showed asymmetrical mutual induction, meaning supposedly drawing power from the secondary coil didn't load down the primary input circuit in the usual way. It also discusses his resonance transformers, suggesting they could achieve over 100% efficiency by transforming power in resonance with the surrounding medium, the ether.
And that famous single-wire transmission idea.
Right. The source claims Tesla's system didn't actually transmit bulk power from the generator down the wire. Instead, it used the changing potential of the electric field along the wire, more like an information signal, to activate resonant receivers. It mentions modern researchers like Avram Mengo supposedly repeating these experiments, lighting lamps, powering fans.
With significant power.
Apparently, yes. The source mentions tests suggesting up to 100 kilowatt levels, claiming the wire carries more of a polarization current signal than raw power from the generator.
Wow. And the story about Tesla's fuelless car in 1934.
The document does mention that alleged demonstration a car supposedly powered by a device using 12 vacuum tubes running on ambient energy. It also touches on his grander vision of wireless power transmission via standing waves of electric potential, theoretically powering countless resonant devices without interference.
Incredible claims. Almost feels like science fiction even now. Who else is highlighted? Thomas Townsend Brown.
Yes, T. Townsend Brown. His focus, according to the source, was on reactionless propulsion, using purely electric forces, not expelling mass like a rocket. It cites his 1927 English patent describing a charged capacitor actually generating a thrust, moving towards its positive plate.
Just voltage creating movement, no propellant.
That's the claim presented. Later patents supposedly detailed methods for both propulsion and free power generation using asymmetrical electrostatic forces, often involving specially shaped surfaces.
And the efficiency claims.
The source quotes Brown claiming efficiencies could be million to one because the work is supposedly done by the potential field itself without draining the primary source that created the field, after the initial charge perhaps. The document views electrogravitics based on this as promising, especially for space travel, maybe even allowing work against gravity without continuous power input.
Fascinating. Let's tick off a few others mentioned. Alfred Earl Hubbard.
Hubbard, back in 1921 apparently, showed a device with a central coil and 8 surrounding coils. After an initial electrical kick, it reportedly became self-sustaining, self-exciting, and could power a motor. Demonstrations on a boat and car are mentioned.
And Lester Hendershot.
Hendershot, around 1928, is said to have built a generator using radio parts, notably a non-inductive coil producing about 300 watts. The source connects this to William Cooper's later experiments with similar non-inductive bipolar coils.
Cooper got a patent.
Yes, a 1971 U.S. patent is cited, claiming principles for getting power in a secondary circuit without a reaction back on the primary, and also for reactionless propulsion. Cooper's theory apparently involved using a pulsing electric field to somehow depolarize atoms, releasing them from gravity's grip.
The idea of messing with gravity keeps popping up. What about those old unbalanced wheel designs?
Right. The source mentions a modern designer, Hugo Fraga, in Cuba, working on gravity-powered wheels. But it emphasizes this isn't new, tracing similar concepts way back. Boscar in India, 1150, de Onecure in France, 1200s, Jacopo in Italy, 1400s, Somerset in England, 1600s. Even Leonardo da Vinci's water-lifting system is mentioned as having variable topology.
So the core idea, even centuries ago, was maybe creating an asymmetry in the gravitational potential field to get continuous motion.
That seems to be the interpretation offered, yes. Finding ways to make gravity pull more on one side of a cycle than the other.
Okay, jumping forward again. John Searle and his Searle's disks. What was that about?
Searle's device is described as a system of rotating magnets and rollers. High rotational speeds supposedly displaced free electrons outwards, leading to visible effects like phosphorescence and air ionization.
What made it spin, according to the source?
It suggests a mechanism involving Lorentz forces and the Poynting vector. Ionization currents flowing inwards from the periphery allegedly interacted with the magnetic fields of the rollers, creating a self-sustaining rotation via the Lorentz force. The document cites Russian experiments from 1992 by Roshin and Godin that claimed really significant results.
Like what?
Like 7 kilowatts of output power, a substantial axial thrust like an anti-gravity effect of 100 kilograms, and interestingly, a decrease in the ambient temperature around the device while it was running.
Temperature decrease. That sounds like that anti-entropy idea again, doesn't it?
It does. And that leads nicely into Floyd Sweet's vacuum triode amplifier, the VTA. This is presented as another key example. Sweet apparently used barium ferrate magnets that were specially conditioned.
Conditioned how?
The source uses terms like bistable or having acoustic domains. The idea seems to be the conditioning process created a unique internal magnetic structure that allowed the magnet's field state to be switched or modulated with only a very weak input signal.
And what did this VTA supposedly do?
It generated significant output power, much more than the input. Part of the output was fed back to keep it running, the rest was available for a load. Tom Bearden is cited as confirming it exhibited strange effects, interpreted as involving negative energy or operating in negative time, where gravity even seemed to become repulsive near the device.
Negative time, repulsive gravity. And physical effects, too.
Yes, the document claims the VTA's physical weight actually decreased as its power output increased. And the magnets themselves reportedly got cold, self-cooling by as much as 20 degrees Celsius below ambient temperature.
Wow.
The source links this cooling and the weight change directly to density of time concepts from Nikolai Kozyrev's theories, even suggesting that daily and seasonal variations in the VTA's output power correlated with Kozyrev's proposed changes in time density or ether density. It's framed as an asymmetrical cause-effect system. The conditioning reportedly involved things like passing an arc discharge through the magnet material.
These examples are all over the map. Mechanical wheels, plasma, specially treated magnets. Are there other distinct technological threads mentioned?
Yeah, several more. There's Nikolai Zayev's work in Russia on getting extra power from nonlinear materials. He apparently had a registered discovery in 1979 and patents in the 80s related to cooling dielectric or ferrite materials while simultaneously generating electrical energy or converting ambient heat directly into electricity. The source quotes Tsiolkovsky about needing to create exclusive conditions to make heat flow from cold to hot, implying that's what these inventors managed to do.
Again, that sounds like defying standard thermodynamics, doesn't it?
It certainly challenges the simple interpretation of the second law, yes. The Swiss Methanetha community's electrostatic machine is also mentioned. It's described as a modern version of old electrophore generators, but incorporating magnets and reportedly producing substantial power since the 1980s, up to 750 kilowatts total from their setup. The output apparently scaled significantly with size, a 20-centimeter disk yielding 200 W, but a 3-meter disk yielding 30 kilowatts.
So size mattered there.
Seems so. Then there's William Hyde's 1990 U.S. patent for a device using electrostatic potential energy. It apparently employed something called a metascreen. The description suggests this was key to avoiding the deceleration phase of the electrostatic cycle, again aiming to extract network from the potential field.
What about motors running just on permanent magnets? Reed's motor, Howard Johnson.
Howard Johnson's 1979 U.S. patent is discussed specifically. The idea here is tapping into the energy inherent in the electron spins within the ferromagnetic material of the magnets themselves, using their superconductive characteristics, as the source puts it, and carefully designed asymmetrical geometry to create continuous motion and extract power without consuming the magnet itself.
So not using power to make the field, but harnessing the energy of the field that's already there.
That's the concept presented, yes. Johnson's working model reportedly produced about 5 kilowatts. The document makes the point that any permanent magnet is already a kind of micro-level perpetual motion device of the third kind, because the electron spins maintain the field indefinitely without external power. The trick is creating a macroscopic asymmetry, a gradient, to get useful work out of it, analogous to how an airfoil uses shape to get lift from airflow.
Robert Adams and Harold Aston are linked to this too.
Yes, the Adams motor is described rotor with radial magnets, stator coils. The key claim is that its open magnetic flux design allows power to be taken off without causing the rotor to slow down as much as a conventional generator would. It emphasizes magnetic induction and magnetization-demagnetization cycles rather than standard electromagnetic induction. Adams was apparently aiming for a 10 kilowatt model. The source notes these are sometimes called alternators in this context, citing patents like John Eckland's. The author even mentions personal experiments where ferrite cores in such a setup self-cooled, again suggesting that anti-entropy or cooling effect.
Self-cooling seems to be a recurring theme.
It does pop up quite a bit. The design challenge, according to the source, is to manage the magnetic flux interaction asymmetrically, making it decrease on approach and increase on departure, for instance.
Okay, we've heard about vacuum energy, magnets, electrostatics. What about just pulling electricity from the air? Atmospheric electricity.
Joseph Swenson's work is mentioned in that vein. He reportedly tapped atmospheric electricity using planetary field pulsations, the Schumann resonance around 7.5 hertz, although Swenson apparently used a higher harmonic around 375 kilohertz. His setup involved an antenna, a resonant circuit, and a diode rectifier. The source points out this basic idea is very old, citing experiments by Lomonosov and Riemann in the 1700s with wires connected to grounded Leyden jars.
Henry Moray is another famous name with huge claims from the early 20th century.
Moray is credited with demonstrating devices producing over 50 kilowatts of free power. His setups involved capacitors, coils, and special vacuum tubes or lamps. The source speculates his work might be analogous to Hubbard's coils and perhaps tapped into nucleus energy via some form of resonance. His book, The Sea of Energy, is referenced.
It really feels like the document is building a case by sheer volume of examples, pointing to a pattern across different technologies.
That seems to be the strategy, yes. It briefly mentions Oliver Crane and RQM Corporation in Switzerland offering devices based on Crane's theories, Hans Kohler's alleged 60-kilowatt device from Germany in the 20s-40s using magnets and coils, and Bruce De Palma's work with unipolar induction.
What was the key point about De Palma's unipolar generator?
De Palma rotated a magnetized conductor or a disk in a field. The claim is that the deceleration or back torque was significantly less than in a conventional generator producing the same current. The Lorentz force creating the current is radial, supposedly not directly opposing the rotation in the same way. Research by others like Tawari in India, Ashley Gray in New Zealand, and even a Japanese MIT report mentioning a 40-kilowatt superconducting version are cited as supporting evidence.
Okay, any others before we move to broader implications?
Just a couple more quick ones. Wingate-Lambertson apparently developed devices using thin metal ceramic layers that somehow added energy to free electrons passing through, generating about 1,600 watts per unit. And Alexander Chernetsky and Yuri Galkin's self-generating discharge, or SGD.
Right, the plasma arc thing.
Yes, an electric arc within a transformer circuit. The claim was it dramatically increased power output while reducing input consumption, entering a state of negative resistance. A 1971 experiment apparently went wrong, producing a massive reversed current pulse that destroyed the transformer.
How do they explain that?
Chernetsky apparently linked it to plasma instabilities, like the pinch effect. But the document author suggests electron acceleration by the strong potential field in the spark gap itself is a better explanation, noting that a larger gap yielded more surplus power. They supposedly used DC measurements to rule out simple AC phase shift artifacts.
And this HED was linked to other strange effects.
Yes, the source connects it to generating longitudinal waves, biological effects like accelerating or suppressing plant growth nearby, biologically active radiations, and again draws parallels to Kozyrev's waves of density of time potentially being used by living organisms. It's presented as developed enough for scaling, but fundamentally outside classical physics. Paulo and Alexander Correa in Canada are also mentioned briefly for anomalous electric discharge patents claiming high efficiency.
And high-efficiency electrolysis, making hydrogen almost free.
Right. The argument is that the electric field moves the ions, and ideally, that movement shouldn't cost energy from the power source itself. While normal electrolysis drains the battery, the source suggests clever designs can minimize this. Lachanov's 1888 observation about gas pressure not affecting power draw is cited as an early anomaly. Igor Goryachev, using low-voltage pulsing, 0.2 V, claimed over 1,500% efficiency, and Professor Kanarev supposedly proved plasma electrolysis can yield net energy output.
And finally, cold fusion gets looped in.
Yes, or warm nuclear syntheses, as Ivan Filimonenko called his work in Russia starting in 1957. He reportedly found excess energy during heavy water electrolysis and explored applications like propulsion and reducing radioactivity. The document claims this work actually received secret government backing in 1960 for energy, propulsion, and radiation shielding, but was later suppressed.
Suppressed why, according to the source?
It suggests opposition from the established nuclear power industry. Although the 2-PAS-Z space reactors are mentioned as a related technology that did get used, cold fusion is positioned as a cheaper alternative to hot fusion reactors like tokamaks. The potential military uses influencing radioactivity remotely, reactionless drives are heavily implied as reasons for secrecy or suppression. Commercial efforts in the U.S. are noted, and a Canadian review mentioning scalar torsion fields affecting decay rates is linked back to Filimonenko's claims.
Okay, so this document lays out an incredible panorama of unconventional energy concepts and historical projects, all suggesting energy generation beyond just burning fuel.
That's absolutely the core message. But importantly, the document is also very upfront about the massive hurdles these technologies face.
Right, beyond just getting them to work reliably. What kind of hurdles?
Well, first, the obvious economic competition. The source explicitly points out the hard fight against established energy companies and the massive infrastructure built around centralized power generation. There's a huge vested interest in the status quo.
And the patent issue you mentioned earlier.
Definitely. A major barrier. Patent offices frequently reject these inventions outright, classifying them as impossible perpetuum mobile based on perceived violations of fundamental physics laws. Howard Johnson's magnet motor patent reportedly faced years of delay for this reason, even though it was eventually granted.
The author also implies active pushback from parts of the scientific community.
Yes, suggesting some scientific groups interested in keeping in force the ideas of primitive materialism have actively distorted or suppressed these ideas. Also, the traditional focus in physics on easily measurable, tangible phenomena has made it hard to investigate subtle field effects, though the author believes new measurement tools are helping overcome that.
And the military angle we touched on, is that seen as a reason for suppression?
It's presented as a very significant factor, yes. The potential for powerful military applications like remotely neutralizing nuclear weapons by influencing radioactivity or developing reactionless propulsion for aircraft or spacecraft is suggested as a major reason why breakthroughs might be classified or kept secret. Filimonenko's cold fusion work is given as a prime example of this.
The source also seems to highlight systemic problems, particularly in Russia where the author worked.
It does. It criticizes a lack of support for inventors and innovation that falls outside the established scientific mainstream, leading talent to leave the country or their ideas to be used without credit. The document concludes quite dramatically that this has led to grandiose misinformation of society, effectively creating two different worlds, separated by the level of knowledge, evident and hidden knowledge.
Wow. That's a strong statement.
Hmm.
So this isn't just about building better generators. The document explores much wider, almost philosophical implications too.
Absolutely. It goes way beyond just cheap, clean energy. It proposes that these free energy systems might actually interact with and change causality in the surrounding spacetime, potentially creating macro-level quantum-like effects.
Macro-level quantum effects, like what things behaving weirdly on a large scale.
Things like increased uncertainty, maybe even the tunnel effect or diffraction occurring for macroscopic objects, not just subatomic particles. It links this idea again to Kozyrev's controversial experiments with gyroscopes supposedly interacting with time or space. The document even speculates this could be a pathway towards, well, teleportation by manipulating space-time parameters to make distant locations contiguous.
Teleportation, okay, that really escalates things way beyond energy.
It certainly does. It also touches on biological connections. Some systems, like Chernetsky's SGD, were reported to emit biologically active radiations that affected plant growth. The source muses that maybe living organisms themselves tap into these subtle energy fields or waves of density of time, Kozyrev again, for energy beyond just food metabolism. These devices are described as potentially involving negative entropy processes, which could influence biological systems towards greater order.
And the economic and societal shifts.
Huge. The document envisions these technologies enabling entirely new economic models based on decentralized power, freeing individuals and communities from reliance on current energy monopolies. This could fundamentally alter the global economic balance. The author specifically flags Russia's potential advantage, given its history with some of these researchers. But it stresses that making this happen requires a concerted effort, scientists collaborating with businesses bold enough to invest in these parallel energy markets, or perhaps focusing on niche applications like space commercialization, where the payoff for fuelless power is immense.
So wrapping up our deep dive into Forlov's free energy document, we've journeyed through ideas about pulling energy from the vacuum, rethinking energy conservation in 4D, and looked at this incredible, almost bewildering gallery of inventors and devices. Tesla, Brown, Sweet, Searle, Chernetsky, so many others, all allegedly demonstrating ways to get power without conventional fuel.
Yeah, it's a lot. We've seen how the source ties these diverse claims together with theories involving asymmetrical interactions, zero-point energy, time density, maybe even anti-gravity and nuclear effects. And we've also confronted the major roadblocks presented, conflicts with mainstream physics, patent battles, economic inertia, and the shadow of potential military secrecy.
It paints a picture of a reality where energy isn't just something you burn or consume, but something potentially accessible everywhere, if you can just figure out how to interact with the underlying structure of space-time in the right way. A potential that, according to this source, remains largely untapped or even actively hidden.
Indeed. A world of hidden knowledge, as the source puts it, that could change everything if brought into the open and validated.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, drawing from the source's implications. If the stability of matter, its very solidity and existence, is just a parameter, just a feature of how processes unfold in a space-time that has its own energy density and structure, what does that really mean about the fundamental nature of the world around you? What is real if the background it exists against is itself so dynamic and full of potential?